The millionaire's wife abandoned him after he lost everything. The cleaner he helped 10 years ago appeared when he fell. "You're a failure, Alex. You always were. The money just hid it from yourself." Those were the last words Victoria Thorne spoke to her husband before slamming the penthouse door with a thud so dry, so calculated, it sounded less like a farewell and more like a verdict. Alexander Sterling stood motionless in the middle of the white marble living room, the very room he had designed, he had paid for, he had filled with art and light. He listened as his wife's heels clicked away down the hall with the same indifference one shows when leaving a transient hotel. He was 45 years old. Exactly 16 hours ago, he was the CEO of Sterling Holdings, one of the most powerful real estate development and infrastructure firms on the East Coast. He had 3,000 employees, federal government contracts, a fleet of corporate jets, and an offshore account in the Cayman Islands that slept with 9 zeros. He had a beautiful wife, a calendar packed with dinners with senators, and a reputation he had built brick by brick over 20 years of relentless work. And now he had nothing. The collapse had begun 48 hours earlier, when bank auditors called at 6 a.m. with a voice that allowed no optimistic interpretations. The group's accounts were empty, not in the red, not in technical deficit, but empty, as if someone had opened the bottom and drained every last cent with the methodical patience of someone who knew every key, every lock, every password of the system. Alex's partner, Marcus Blackwood, hadn't shown up at the office that day, nor the next. His phone had gone straight to voicemail since 5 a.m. His personal assistant had resigned via text message, and the corporate counsel, a man Alex had treated like family for 12 years, had sent a brief, cold, professional email stating he could no longer represent him due to emerging conflicts of interest. Alex had spent those 48 hours in emergency meetings, calls with banks, conversations with external lawyers, trying to understand the magnitude of what had happened. And what he was understanding, layer by layer, like peeling an onion with raw hands, was that it wasn't an accounting error, or a bad investment, or a liquidity crisis. It was a systematic betrayal, planned years in advance, executed with surgical precision that could only have come from someone who knew him from the inside out. At 11 p.m. on the second day, when the external lawyers also began to distance themselves and the banks started talking about asset freezes, Alex arrived at the penthouse and found Victoria sitting on the sofa with a glass of white wine in her hand and a Louis Vuitton suitcase already packed by the door. She didn't cry, didn't ask what had happened, didn't say, "I'm here," or "We'll get through this together," or any of those phrases one imagines a wife says when the world collapses. She just took a long sip of wine. She looked him up and down with that calm that Alex had always found elegant, and which that night revealed itself as what it had always been, perfectly rehearsed indifference. And she said, "I'm going to my mother's. Don't call me." "Victoria," he began. "No, Alex." She placed the glass on the glass coffee table with a delicacy that irritated more than any slammed door. "I didn't marry a ruined man. That wasn't part of the deal. We've been married 14 years, and they were 14 good years, but they're over." It was then she uttered that sentence that would haunt him for weeks, that would echo in his head, in the quietest and loudest moments, that would wake him at 3 a.m. with the same brutality as a bucket of ice water. "You're a failure, Alex. You always were. The money just hid it from yourself." And she left. Alex remained standing in the living room, for he didn't know how long. The penthouse smelled of her perfume, Chanel, No. 5, always the same since they met. And that smell now felt unbearable, like forensic evidence of everything that had been a lie. He sat on the sofa, then got up, walked to the window, and looked at the city at night, that city he had helped build, literally and figuratively, with his cranes and his contracts and his money. He felt something he hadn't felt since he was 20. Sleeping in a leaky rooftop room with a 2-burner stove, he felt he didn't belong anywhere. He grabbed his jacket, the same one he had worn to the emergency meetings, now wrinkled, already without the authority the Italian cut normally lent it, and walked out. He had no plan, no destination, just the primal need to walk, to put distance between himself and that penthouse that was no longer his, because the bank would probably foreclose before dawn. Outside, it was raining. Not a polite city drizzle, but a dense, persistent rain, the kind that soaks your shoes before you can react. Alex walked without an umbrella, without direction, without hurrying. The water hit his face, and he let it, because the physical cold was easier to bear than the cold inside. He crossed avenues he recognized by heart. He had signed paving contracts on some of them, and without intending to, he arrived at a small park about 10 blocks from the penthouse. It was a modest neighborhood park, with green-painted iron benches and a couple of yellow streetlights battling the darkness without much success. Under normal circumstances, Alexander Sterling would never have set foot in that park. Under normal circumstances, Alexander Sterling traveled in an armored Suburban with a driver, but normal circumstances had ceased to exist 48 hours ago. He sat on one of the wet benches. His black suit immediately absorbed the water from the bench. He didn't care. He rested his elbows on his knees, buried his face in his hands, and stayed like that, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of everything: the company, the fraud, Victoria, the 14 years, the 20 years of work, his reputation, his future fall upon him like an unnamed slab that crushed just the same. He didn't cry, not yet. Men like Alexander Sterling learned from a young age that crying was a luxury the world wouldn't forgive. So he simply stayed there, broken inside and soaked outside, on a park bench at midnight, being nobody. It was then he heard wheels on the wet pavement. The sound was small, squeaky, like metal wheels needing oil, yet still moving with determination. Alex looked up and saw emerging from between the streetlights, with the naturalness of something that had always been there, a stainless steel coffee and pastry cart. It was modest but clean, with a small gas burner lit under a tray where freshly baked muffins lay wrapped, and a pewter container with steaming hot apple cider. Small yellow string lights, like those for a fair, the kind you see on market stalls and never quite know how they're supported, hung from the structure, giving the cart a lively, warm appearance, absurdly out of place on that rainy, ruined night. And behind the cart was a woman, in her late 30s, perhaps 37, dark hair pulled back in a bun that the rain had begun to unravel, dark skin, large brown eyes, a white apron over a floral blouse whose shoulders the water had darkened. She was petite but moved with a quiet energy, like someone accustomed to effort who no longer registered it as such. She pushed the cart with both hands and hummed something under her breath that Alex couldn't identify. An old soul tune, perhaps, with the low voice of someone singing to herself and no one else. When she saw him sitting on the bench, the woman stopped, looked at him, and at that moment, something strange happened. She recognized him. Alex saw it clearly. That small start in her eyes, that fraction of a second where the body betrays what the mind is still processing. Though he, for his part, had no idea who she was. The woman recovered quickly, moved the cart a few feet from the bench, and without asking, without announcing herself, poured a thick, cinnamon-colored hot apple cider into a styrofoam cup, with white steam rising in spirals against the cold air. She placed it on the edge of the tray, took 2 muffins with a napkin, and set them next to the cup. Then she walked to Alex with direct, unfaltering steps and extended the cup and muffins to him. "Take it," she said simply. "With this cold, you need something warm." Alex looked at her. He wanted to say he didn't need charity. He wanted to say he was Alexander Sterling, that he had had more money than that cart would ever see in 100 years. He wanted to say many things that pride still tried to dictate, though he no longer had the strength to obey it. But what he said was, "How much do I owe you?" "Nothing," she replied. "Tonight, nothing." And Alexander Sterling, businessman, former magnate, a man who had learned since childhood that nothing in life was free and that gratitude was a disguised form of debt, took the cup with both hands, felt the warmth of the cider penetrate his numb fingers, and said nothing more. The rain continued to fall, the cart's little lights flickered softly, and the woman stood a respectful distance away, looking into the night with an expression that Alex, had he been in a state to read others' expressions that night, he would have recognized as something between relief and compassion and a very old sadness. She knew who he was. He didn't know who she was, and neither of them imagined at that moment how that difference would change their lives. The memory of her. The apple cider was made with cinnamon and brown sugar, thick with the warmth only hands that learned the recipe from someone who learned it from someone else, a chain of women and hearths lost to time. Alex drank it slowly, saying nothing, his hands wrapped around the styrofoam cup, as if it were the only warm thing left in the world. And that night, in all literalness, it was. The woman with the cart didn't rush him, didn't try to make conversation, didn't look at him with pity, which was the worst thing that could happen to a man in his state. Pity would have broken him in half. She simply busied herself with her tasks, arranging the muffins, checking the burner flame, wiping the edge of the tray with a cloth. With that ability, certain people have to be present, without being a burden. Alex finished the cider, left the cup on the bench beside him, with the almost involuntary care of someone being medicated in certain manners and preserves them even when everything else has gone to hell. He ate one muffin in silence. The other he held in his hand without eating it, watching the steam rise from the open pastry. "Do you come out with this every day?" he finally asked. It wasn't a question of courtesy. It was simply the first thing his brain formulated in human communication mode after hours of internal collapse. "Monday through Saturday," she replied, without stopping her tidying. "I go out at 10 p.m., cover 4 neighborhoods, come back around 1 or 1:30. Even in the rain? Even in the rain. People who work at night still get hungry when it rains." Alex nodded slightly. He looked at the cart with more attention than he had initially given it. It was old, but well maintained. The welds on the edges were sanded, without sharp points. The tray gleamed with the patience of someone who cleans it every night. The yellow lights were fastened with small wooden clothespins, like grandmothers used to hang clothes. Everything about that cart spoke of scarcity managed with dignity. "Is the cart yours?" he asked. "Mine and the bank's," she said with a small smile that came and went in a second. "But in that, I'm like half the country." Alex didn't smile, not yet. But something in that answer, the honesty without self-pity, the dry humor, the absence of complaint, made him look at her for the first time since she had appeared. Look at her for real, as one looks at a person and not a landscape. And that's when she spoke. "I know you," she said softly, without looking up from the tray, "or I used to know you a long time ago." Alex frowned, studied her, the dark hair, the large eyes, the firm jawline, the hands that never stopped moving with that quiet efficiency. Nothing. There was no flicker of memory on his face. "Do we know each other?" he asked. "Yes." She looked at him then, and in her eyes there was something that was neither accusation, nor resentment, nor sentimental nostalgia. It was something more complex, harder to name. The serene recognition of someone who for 10 years has carried a debt kept in her heart, and who suddenly, without having planned it, finds herself in front of the one who generated it. "You won't remember me," she said. "And that's fine. I remember you." Her name was Maria Rodriguez, 37 years old, from Queens, daughter of a seamstress and an electrician who died young of a heart attack on a construction site. The first lesson life taught her about what happens to bodies that work tirelessly and without a safety net. She studied up to her 3rd semester of accounting at a state university before the family's finances collapsed, and she had to choose between her career and rent. She chose rent because there was no other option. At 27, she joined Sterling Holdings as a cleaner. It was one of those glass skyscrapers on Park Avenue that seemed designed to remind people outside how much money they didn't have. Maria cleaned offices from the 5th to the 10th floor on the 6 a.m. shift. She arrived before almost everyone. She left when the day was already bustling with people, and she had the characteristic invisibility of those who make others' spaces shine without anyone ever looking at them. She was good at her job. She was punctual, meticulous, quiet in the way people who clean marble floors in corporate buildings are expected to be quiet. But Maria Rodriguez had a particularity that no one in that company would have imagined if anyone had bothered to ask her anything beyond. "Have you finished the executive washroom?" She had an almost photographic accounting memory. 3 semesters of accounting, plus years of seeing the family's numbers stretch as far as they would go, had developed an instinct for numerical patterns that some full-career accountants didn't possess. And Maria, while cleaning the floors of Sterling Holdings, saw things not because she spied, not because she searched, simply because documents were left on desks. And people who clean around desks exist in a state of invisibility that makes no one bother to turn over a page. Maria saw invoices, saw reports, saw printed transfers someone had forgotten or discarded. And what she saw didn't add up. Numbers going to accounts that didn't correspond to any supplier she had seen billed. Amounts repeating in patterns too regular to be coincidences, documents with signatures that weren't the same as those on the authorized documents hung on conference room walls. Maria wasn't a certified accountant. She had no hierarchy, no voice, no credentials that would make anyone believe her when she said, "Something's wrong here." But she kept everything she saw. She wrote it down in a notebook with the date and details. For 3 months, from the cleaning floor, she reconstructed a partial but coherent picture of something that smelled very bad. And one day, not knowing quite how to channel what she had, she went directly to the head of administration's office and asked to speak. What happened next was swift and brutal. The head of administration listened with that cold courtesy executives show when someone without power tells them something they don't want to hear. He told her he appreciated her concern, but that these were complex accounting matters beyond the scope of someone in her position. The next day, Maria was called by the cleaning coordinator and informed that her contract would not be renewed due to departmental restructuring. There was no severance, no letter of recommendation, nothing, just the end. But what happened 3 weeks after she was fired was what changed everything. Maria was carrying 2 buckets of water down the 4th floor hallway. She had returned that day to pick up some personal items she had forgotten. When the wet floor betrayed her right foot in a fraction of a second, she fell backward. The fall was bad. Her head hit the edge of the cleaning cart. Her hip hit the marble. She lay on the floor, unable to get up, the world spinning, and a pain in her hip that stole her breath. Her colleagues on the floor called the security guard. The guard called the coordinator. And the coordinator, efficient, pragmatic, very aware that Maria was no longer an active employee of the company, and that an accident occurring on company premises to someone no longer an active employee was a legal problem of considerable dimensions. He began to do what systems do when someone without power becomes a problem. She began to dilute, to distance, to talk about protocols and contractual validity verification. Maria was on the 4th floor pavement with a broken hip, a fracture the doctor would confirm hours later. When the elevator door opened and Alexander Sterling stepped out, it was 7:15 a.m. Alex always arrived early. He saw everything in a second. The woman on the floor, the puddle of water, the overturned cart, the group of people standing passively, waiting for someone else to decide what to do. What happened? He asked with the direct voice of someone who doesn't ask rhetorical questions. Everyone spoke at once. Alex raised a hand to silence them all and knelt beside Maria. He asked her name. He asked where it hurt. He asked if she could move her foot. His eyes were the color of dark coffee, and his expression was neither condescending nor performatively compassionate. It was simply that of someone evaluating a situation with the intent to solve it. "We're calling an ambulance," he said, rising, "and someone is going to explain to me why this woman was carrying those buckets alone." The coordinator tried to say something about contractual status. Alex looked at her in a way that made the sentence die halfway. "Contractual status will be resolved at another time. Right now, what matters is that this person is injured on our premises. Call the ambulance. I'll cover the medical expenses." And so it was. Alexander Sterling paid for Maria Rodriguez's hip surgery, the hospital, the rehabilitation, 3 months of medication. He did it from his personal account, not the company's, to prevent the legal process from getting tangled. He did it without announcing it, without asking for photographs, without talking to the media. He did it because he considered it correct. And deep down, very deep down, behind the Italian suits and the meetings in D.C. power circles, Alexander Sterling was still the son of a construction worker from Queens, who knew perfectly well what it was like to fall on a floor that wasn't yours without anyone taking responsibility for it. Maria never got to thank him directly. When she tried to contact him weeks later, recovered, she was told that Mr. Sterling was on a business trip, then that he was in meetings, then that the corporate office didn't handle personal communications of that type. Life went on. Years passed. Maria moved forward as she always did, working, saving, enduring, but she never forgot. And now she stood before him in a park in the rain with the coffee and pastry cart, which was the result of 10 years of starting over as many times as necessary, looking at the man who once saved her, unknowingly, at the worst moment of her life. "You paid for my hip surgery," Maria said softly. 10 years ago at the Sterling Holdings building, I fell on the 4th floor, and you called the ambulance and covered all the expenses. I was the morning shift cleaner." Alex looked at her. Something stirred in his memory. A flash, a blurry image of a morning long ago, a woman on the floor. The scent of pine from the overturned cleaning cart, but the image was imprecise, without a defined face, like all the things one does without giving them importance at the moment. He began. "You don't have to remember me," she said without bitterness. "What you didn't do for me to remember you. I noticed that later, when I realized there was no note, no card, nothing with your name, just the hospital receipt with the legend, 'Paid in full.'" Alex remained silent. "I've spent 10 years thinking about how to thank you," Maria continued. "It's no small thing you did. That surgery gave me back the ability to walk well, and walking well is what allows me to push this cart, which is what allows me to support my daughter, which is what allows me to keep going." She turned off the burner flame with a flick of her wrist and looked directly at Alex. "So tonight, Mr. Sterling, even if I don't know what happened to you or why you're sitting here on this bench in the rain with that ruined suit and that look like the world ended, Tonight I'm the one paying the debt, even if it's just with cider and muffins. Alexander Sterling, who hadn't cried in 48 hours of absolute collapse, who hadn't cried when the auditors called, nor when the banks started talking about asset freezes, nor when Victoria slammed the door with that dry, final thud, felt something hot and inconvenient pressing behind his eyes. He cleared his throat. He looked away, into the wet darkness of the park, into nowhere. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice barely steady. "Maria," she said. "Maria Rodriguez." "Maria." He repeated it as if filing it away somewhere inside. "Thank you for the cider." She nodded, and without making more of it, with that naturalness she had for turning big moments into manageable things, she unhooked one of the yellow lights that had come loose from its clip and carefully reattached it. "It's going to keep raining," she said. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" And Alexander Sterling, former magnate, former owner of a white marble penthouse, with a panoramic view of the city that had ceased to be his, looked at the rain and didn't answer, because the truth was, he did not. The longest night. Maria Rodriguez was not a woman who made decisions lightly. 10 years of raising a daughter alone, of managing every dollar with the precision of someone who knows the next isn't guaranteed, of learning to distinguish between people who deserve trust and people who only seem to deserve it, had sharpened her instinct until it was almost infallible. And her instinct that night told her two simultaneous and seemingly contradictory things: that the man sitting on that bench was dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with violence, and that she couldn't leave him there. The danger wasn't him. It was what a man with that weight on him could do to himself, alone in a park at midnight in the rain, with nowhere to go. Maria knew that kind of loneliness. She had seen it in her father in the months before his heart attack, when the construction site where he worked started going bad, and he would come home with slumped shoulders and empty eyes, and a smile that was no longer a smile but the muscle memory of having smiled once. She had learned to recognize that expression for what it was, the moment a person stopped seeing themselves as something worth sustaining. Alexander Sterling had that expression. "Come," she said without alarm, without dramatizing, in the same voice she would have used to say, "The cider's ready. My apartment is 4 blocks away. There's a couch. It's small, but it's dry." Alex looked at her. "I can't accept that." "You already accepted the cider and muffins," Maria replied, starting to move the cart. "The couch is more of the same. Come on." There was no further argument. Alex rose from the wet bench with the weight of someone whose muscles had forgotten their purpose. He picked up his soaked jacket and followed Maria and her cart through the rain-slicked streets with the docility of someone who no longer has the energy to resist reasonable things. The 4 blocks were silent. Maria pushed the cart with its squeaky wheels, and Alex walked beside her, hands in the pockets of his wet pants, looking at the ground. They passed a convenience store with its sign lit, a closed taco truck with chairs on the tables, a dog that watched them from a doorway without barking. The city at night has a particular intimacy that the city by day never has. It shows its real structure without the varnish of movement and noise. Maria's building was 4 stories high. A salmon-colored stucco facade, peeling paint, stairs without an elevator, black metal handrails. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. Maria chained the cart on the ground floor, a combination lock. The chain wrapped twice around the nearest post and went up ahead of Alex with silent steps. "Careful not to make noise on the wooden stairs that creaked if you didn't know where to step." "My daughter's asleep," she said softly, without turning. "I don't want to wake her." Alex nodded in the darkness. Apartment 3B had a living room, an integrated kitchen, a bathroom, and a bedroom. It was small, with an honesty that didn't apologize. White painted walls with damp stains in one corner, green and yellow tile floor, a window with blue checkered curtains that didn't quite block out the light from the street lamp. There was a dining table with 2.5 chairs, a makeshift bookshelf with boards and bricks, where second-hand novels coexisted with school notebooks, and a small framed picture of a loved one, and a 3-seater burgundy sofa that had seen better days, but held its dignity. On the walls were drawings, many of them taped up, some framed with colored paper, arranged without apparent order but with evident affection. Drawings of houses with chimneys puffing heart-shaped clouds, of families under the sun, of animals with names written below in a child's hand, of a woman with an apron and a food cart that Alex immediately recognized as Maria, seen through her daughter's eyes. "Sit down," Maria said, pointing to the sofa. "I'll get you a blanket and dry clothes. I have some of my cousins that he left last month. It'll fit more or less." "You don't have to," Alex began. "I know I don't have to." she interrupted without harshness. I do it because I want to. There's a difference. Alex sat on the burgundy sofa. He heard Maria moving in the bedroom, drawers opening carefully, the soft creak of the floor under her precise steps. He looked at the drawings on the walls and felt something he couldn't quite name, a kind of inverted shame, the discomfort of finding himself in a space completely foreign to everything his life had been, and realizing that this space, despite everything, or perhaps precisely because of everything, felt more alive than the white marble penthouse he had abandoned hours earlier. Maria returned with a plaid wool blanket and a set of gray sweatpants and a blue t-shirt, neatly folded. The bathroom is at the back, she said. There are clean towels on the top shelf. Then, as if thinking for a second, she added, the water heater takes 3 minutes to warm up, no more, so it doesn't use too much gas. Alex took the clothes without saying anything. He went to the bathroom, which was small and spotless, the kind of cleanliness that has nothing to do with money, but with habit and self-respect. And he stood in front of the mirror for the first time in hours. What he saw stopped him. He didn't immediately recognize himself. The man in the mirror had rain-matted hair plastered to his forehead, a 2-day beard that had already crossed the line into unkempt, deep circles under his eyes, his tie undone over the collar of his white shirt, which was no longer white but gray with dampness. He had the face of someone who had aged several years in 48 hours, which was exactly what had happened to him. He showered with the hottest water the heater would give him in 3 minutes, changed into Maria's cousin's clothes, which were short on the legs and wide on the shoulders, but were dry and smelled of fabric softener, that synthetic floral scent Alex vaguely associated with neighborhood laundromats, and which that night seemed the most comforting smell he had known in a long time. He came out of the bathroom and found Maria in the kitchen, her back to him, silently preparing something. On the table, there was a glass of water and 2 aspirins, for when you wake up, she said without turning. With everything you've carried today, you'll wake up with a headache. Alex sat on the sofa and wrapped himself in the plaid blanket. Maria turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the street lamp shining through the blue checkered window, and sat on the chair opposite the sofa with a cup of tea in her hands. You don't have to stay up for me, he said. I'm not staying up for you, Maria replied. It's my tea time. I do it every night before bed since Lily was a baby. It's the only thing that belongs just to me in the day. Alex nodded. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the silence of 2 people who had been through difficult things and who knew, without speaking, that some things didn't need words to be understood. How old is your daughter? He asked. 8. Her name is Lily. A brief pause, laden with that quiet pride mothers who have raised children alone carry and wouldn't trade even if they could. She's the smartest person I know. Her father isn't around, without drama, without visible resentment. He never really was. Sometimes it's easier that way. Alex asked no more questions. Maria finished her tea, and at some point, without Alex having consciously decided to close his eyes, the exhaustion of 48 hours without sleep brought him down with the efficiency of anesthesia, and he fell asleep on the burgundy sofa, with the plaid blanket up to his chin, and the face of a man who for the first time in 2 days wasn't thinking about anything. Maria watched him fall asleep, and waited a few minutes before getting up. She adjusted the blanket where it had slipped. She turned off the small lamp on the bookshelf that she had left on, so as not to leave him completely in the dark, and went to the bedroom where Lily slept, curled in a ball in the center of the bed, as always, taking up 3 times more space than her size merited. She lay down beside her on the edge, careful not to wake her. It took her a while to fall asleep. She lay for a while looking at the dark ceiling, listening to the rain outside, and, beneath the rain, Lily's quiet breathing and the silence of the man sleeping on her sofa. 10 years. She had waited 10 years to be able to say thank you to someone who probably didn't even remember her. And when it had finally happened, that someone's world was in pieces, life had a very particular irony for those who observed it carefully. Maria closed her eyes. At 6:15 a.m., when the sky still wavered between night and day, and the rain had dwindled to a lazy trickle, Maria was already dressed, apron on, hair tied back, silently preparing breakfast. She left at 6:30 without waking Alex, without waking Lily. She had a cleaning shift at a doctor's office in Brooklyn at 7, then 2 hours at an accounting firm on 5th Avenue, then preparation of the cart for the night. The day didn't wait. She left a plate with 2 pieces of toast and scrambled eggs on the dining table, covered with a kitchen towel to keep warm, and next to the plate, she left a folded note. When Alex woke at 8:15, later than he had slept in years, his body suddenly collecting what it was owed, the first thing he saw was the white ceiling with a damp stain in the corner. The second was the drawings on the walls. The third was that he was alone. He sat up slowly, with the back pain that inevitably comes from a night on a small sofa for a man of his size, and found the plate with toast and the folded paper. He opened it. The toast is for reheating. 2 minutes on the griddle over low heat. The bathroom is free until 9. My daughter eats breakfast at 8:30 before school. Please don't tell her who you are. Just say you're an acquaintance. Maria. Alex was rereading the note when he heard small, determined footsteps coming from the bedroom. He quickly folded the paper and put it in the pocket of his gray sweatpants. Lily Rodriguez was 8 years old, with her mother's black hair in 2 braids that weren't exactly symmetrical, because she had evidently done them herself, and the most direct eyes Alex had seen in a long time in anyone of any age. She entered the living room, saw him on the sofa still wrapped in the blanket, and didn't get scared or make a fuss. She just tilted her head slightly, as if evaluating, and said, "Good morning. Are you my mom's acquaintance?" "Yes," Alex replied. "Are you hungry?" "A little. The toast is for reheating," Lily said in exactly the same practical tone as her mother, and went to the kitchen. Alex watched her from the sofa. The girl took out the skillet, placed it on the burner, adjusted the flame with a naturalness that spoke of years of having seen the same thing done. She put the toast on to heat, and while waiting, took a math notebook from her backpack and started doing homework at the dining table, as if having a stranger on her couch were the most normal thing in the world. They ate breakfast together in relative silence. Lily ate and did multiplications, without taking her eyes off her notebook. Alex ate and looked at the drawings on the walls. "Did you draw those?" he asked. "Most of them," Lily replied without looking up. "The ones at the bottom are from when I was 5. I wouldn't draw them the same now. They're good. Thanks." A pause. "The one with the cart lady is my mom, in case you didn't recognize her." "I recognized her." Lily looked up for the first time. She looked at him with that unfiltered gaze of children who haven't yet learned that staring is considered rude in the adult world. "Why do you look like something very bad happened?" Alex didn't know what to answer. "Why did it happen?" he finally said. Lily considered this seriously. Then she went back to her notebook. "My mom says bad things happen so you learn what you didn't learn otherwise. She erased something with the pencil's eraser cap. I don't know if that's true, but she's almost always right." At 8:50, Lily collected her notebook, put everything in her green dinosaur backpack, brushed her teeth, put on her shoes, and left for school with a "see you later" said into the air without specific direction. Alex was left alone in apartment 3B. On the back of the sofa where he had slept, he found something he hadn't seen the night before, a new drawing, made with colored pencils, of a man sitting on a bench in the rain, to whom a woman was giving a steaming cup. In the bottom right corner, in the large, round hand of an 8-year-old girl, it read, "The sad man in the park." Alex held it with both hands for a long moment, then folded it very carefully and put it in the chest pocket of his wet jacket, hanging on the chair. Outside, the city had woken up without rain for the first time in 2 days. The complete betrayal. Alex didn't have his laptop, nor his corporate phone, which had been left on the penthouse desk when he walked out the night before with no plan and no destination. He only had his personal cell phone, a mid-range model he used exclusively for private matters, and which, fortunately, he kept in his jacket pocket instead of his briefcase. The battery showed 16% when he took it out that morning in Maria's apartment, sitting at the dining table in front of the empty toast plate. He searched for the charger in all his pockets, knowing he didn't have it. He didn't have it. Maria had told him in the note that the bathroom would be free until 9. It was 9:08. He checked the wall charger next to the bed that he could see through the half-open bedroom door. A phone charger, Type-C connector. His was lightning, incompatible, 16%. Alex calculated. He had to use it well. He first called Charles Mendeville, his trusted external lawyer. Not the corporate one who had sent the cold email, but a man he had known since high school and whom he had helped pay for law school when they were both young and broke. Charles answered on the second ring with a voice that was not the voice of someone who was glad to see Alex's name on the screen. It was the voice of someone who had been waiting for that call, with a mixture of relief and horror. "Alex, thank goodness. Where are you?" "At an acquaintance's." "I'm fine. What do you know?" Charles's pause lasted exactly long enough to indicate that what he knew was worse than Alex imagined. "A lot, and almost none of it is what you'll want to hear. I have time. 16% battery and no charger. Summarize." Charles Mendeville took a deep breath. "Marcus Blackwood left the country 2 nights ago. Flight to Miami, connection to the Cayman Islands. He traveled with documentation in the name of Edward Blackwood, His middle name, who has a valid passport. I know this because a friend in immigration did me a favor. A pause. The accounts are a systemic issue, Alex. It's not a crime of opportunity. It's a planned extraction over at least 3 years. There are invoices from phantom suppliers, transfers to shell companies in Panama and Delaware, and an overbilling scheme on 6 government contracts that someone put together with deep knowledge of your internal structure. Marcus was with the company for 12 years, Alex said, his voice flat, like someone processing something that wouldn't quite fit. I know, and I'm sorry, but there's more. The 16% was still there, but Alex felt his own body's battery draining in real time. Tell me, access to the security accounts, the authorization level to move those amounts without triggering internal alerts. Marcus didn't have that alone. There was a second signature enabled in the system for 2 years now. Charles took another, longer pause. The signature belonged to Victoria. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Alex heard his own breathing. Repeat that, he said, although he had understood it perfectly the first time. The executive-level digital access signature to the group's accounts was registered in the name of Victoria Thorne Sterling. It was enabled 26 months ago. Alex, she didn't just know what was happening. She was part of the mechanism. The phone was at 12%. Alex didn't notice. Victoria, 14 years of marriage, the woman who had chosen every painting on the penthouse walls, who knew the combination to his personal safe, who had attended Christmas dinners with his partners for over a decade, with that perfect smile and that ability to say the right things at the right time. The woman who 2 nights ago had slammed the door with a dry thud and told him he had always been a failure. She had said it without a tremor in her voice, without a blink of guilt, because she knew exactly what she had done and had rehearsed that exit for months. How long have they been together? Alex asked. It wasn't a question he needed to ask. He knew it the moment he formulated it, but he needed to hear it. According to what I found, and Charles chose his words with the care of a surgeon, at least 4 years. There are hotel records, trips that coincide with your business trips, and a property in the Hamptons bought in the name of a company that lists Victoria as the ultimate beneficiary. The company was incorporated 3 years and 2 months ago. Alex closed his eyes. 4 years. While he was building contracts, negotiating with the federal government, flying to meetings in Boston and Philadelphia and Chicago, convinced he was building something worthwhile, something that would last, something that made sense. Victoria and Marcus had spent 4 years dismantling it brick by brick from the inside, with her signature, with her codes, with the access he had freely given them, because that's how trust works. You grant it without inventory, without audit, because if you audit the people you claim to love, then it's no longer love, but accounting. Is there any way to recover anything? He asked. Yes, Charles said, and in that monosyllable, there was enough determination for Alex to know his friend had already been thinking about this. Not everything is lost. The shell companies have records. Transfers leave a trace. The problem is time and money for the legal process. And right now, both are scarce. I need you to be physically here as soon as possible, and I need you to contact certain contacts who can still help you before this goes cold. Give me 24 hours, Alex. 24 hours, Charles. Give me that. A pause. Okay, but charge your phone. The call ended. The battery read 9%. Alex remained seated in the kitchen chair with the dead phone in his hands. He had turned it off himself to conserve what was left, and he looked at the oilcloth tablecloth with yellow sunflowers on a navy blue background and thought of Victoria with a coldness that felt strange even to himself. It wasn't rage yet. Rage would come later. He knew it with the ferocity of things that accumulate in silence. Now, it was just an arid, almost clinical understanding. He had been the instrument of his own destruction because he had trusted the wrong people with the right intensity. What hurt wasn't the money. The money was recoverable to some extent, with time and work. What hurt was the architecture of the betrayal, how meticulous, how patient, how sustained it had been. 4 years of perfect lies required a kind of determination that Alex, in all his life as a businessman, had never had to apply to anything but building. They had used the same energy he put into building, but to destroy. And they had done it from the inside with his own keys. He was still in that state, his mind circling tighter and tighter around the same center, when he heard a key in the lock and the apartment door opened. Maria entered with 2 grocery bags in her arms, her apron still on, even though it was already midday. The Brooklyn doctor's office ended at 11. The accounting firm lasted until 1, but today she had left early because the accountant had cancelled. Her hair was somewhat loose from her morning bun. She saw Alex sitting at the table with the dead phone in his hands, and looked at him the way Maria looked at almost everything. Directly, without detour, evaluating without judging. "Did you eat anything besides the toast?" she asked, setting the bags on the kitchen counter. "No. How long have you been sitting there?" "I don't know." Maria washed her hands, took out a pot, and started to boil water with the mechanical efficiency of someone who cooks without thinking, because cooking is part of her life's muscular system. "Do you want to tell me about it?" she said, her back to him. Alex looked at her. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. And it wasn't ingratitude. It was genuine incomprehension. He was a man she had known for less than 12 hours, sitting on a park bench in the rain, and she had brought him to her home. She had given him her couch, let him eat breakfast with her daughter, and now she was boiling water for him, as if it were part of the natural order of things. Maria took a moment to answer. She arranged vegetables on the cutting board, took the knife with the hand that knew exactly where it was, because it was always in the same place. "Because you helped me when you had no reason to," she said. "And because my mom taught me that good debts aren't paid with money, they're paid with the same thing you were given. Your mom taught you well. My mom was a seamstress. She sewed 12 hours a day and still had time to teach me what matters." A pause. "What did you find out on the phone?" Alex exhaled slowly. "That my partner fled the country with my money." Pause. "And that my wife helped him." Maria's knife paused over the carrot for half a second. Just half a second. "Your wife was in on it for more than 2 years, according to my lawyer. Probably even before that. They've been together for 4 years. Maria said nothing for a moment. She continued cutting vegetables, but Alex could see in the tension of her shoulders that she was processing. "Did you know?" she asked. It wasn't an accusatory question. It was the question of someone who needs to precisely map another's pain to know how to move near it. "No," Alex said. "I didn't know, and that's the hardest part to accept, that I saw nothing." "Sometimes you don't see because you don't want to see," Maria said with gentle honesty. "It's not blindness. It's deciding to believe that reality is what you want it to be." She put the vegetables in the pot. "I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because the other version, the one where you're stupid or naive or responsible, is worse, and it's a lie." Alex looked at her for a long moment. 10 years ago, he said, "when you were fired from the company after you fell." "Yes. Why didn't you sue with what happened? You had enough reason." Maria stirred the pot with the wooden spoon. "Because back then I was 26 years old. I didn't have money for a lawyer. I had a freshly operated hip and 3 months of recovery ahead, and the company quietly offered me a smaller settlement in exchange for not making noise." A brief pause. "I accepted because I needed to eat and pay rent. That's how the world works when you don't have a safety net, Mr. Sterling." Alex nodded slowly. "But before I was fired," Maria continued without drama, in the same voice she would have used to say anything mundane, "I saw things in that company that didn't add up. I wrote them down. I kept them." Alex tensed. "What kind of things?" "Transfers that didn't match. Invoices from non-existent suppliers. Records that repeated in abnormal patterns." She turned to look at him. "I studied accounting for 3 semesters. I didn't become an accountant, but I understand numbers, and those numbers weren't right. The silence in apartment 3B was now of a different quality. Not the silence of exhaustion, nor of discomfort, but the silence of 2 people who had just realized they were standing on the same spot without having planned it." "What did you do with what you saw?" Alex asked carefully. "I went to report it to the head of administration. The next day, I was notified my contract wouldn't be renewed." Maria looked at him fixedly. "Do you know who the head of administration was back then?" Alex already knew before she said it, but he listened anyway, because he needed to hear it aloud for it to be completely real. "Marcus Blackwood," Maria said, and Alexander Sterling's world, which he thought had finished collapsing the night before, found a new bottom. Because if Marcus had been running that scheme even before Maria discovered it, and had fired her to silence her, then this hadn't started 3 years ago. It had started more than 10, and someone, somewhere in that story, had kept the evidence. "Maria," Alex said, in a voice unlike any he had used in the last 48 hours. It wasn't the voice of the defeated man, nor of the executive in crisis. It was the voice of a man who had just seen an exit in a room he thought was completely sealed. "What happened to those notes you took, Maria?" She turned off the stove, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked at him with an expression that was at once that of someone who had waited 10 years for someone to ask her exactly that question, and that of someone who still wasn't completely sure if it was a good idea to answer it. "I kept them," she said. "You still have them?" A pause that lasted exactly as long as it takes to make a decision one knows will change things. "Yes," Maria said. "I have them." And at that moment, in a small kitchen with a pot of steaming vegetables and an oilcloth tablecloth with yellow sunflowers on a navy blue background, something began that neither of them had planned, but that fate, or justice, or life, which are sometimes the same thing, had been preparing for 10 years. The first step. Alexander Sterling had built his first contract at 23 with $400 borrowed from his uncle, a pickup truck with a cracked windshield and the absolute conviction, the only kind of conviction that works when you have nothing else, that work done with rigor eventually speaks for itself. 22 years later, that conviction was the only thing Marcus Blackwood and Victoria Thorne hadn't been able to steal from him, because it was the only thing they had never understood existed. That's what he thought that morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror in apartment 3B, shaving with the disposable razor Maria had placed without comment on the sink next to a folded towel. He thought it with the cold clarity that sometimes arrives after collapse, when the brain finishes processing the blow and begins, almost against its will, to look for the angle from which one can still stand. He had debts, he had a long and expensive legal battle ahead, his name was tarnished in the corporate circles where he had operated for 2 decades, because news of Sterling Holdings' collapse was already on business news sites. Charles had sent him the links via message before the battery died completely. And in those kinds of news, there's always a mix of facts and rumor that causes damage before anyone has a chance to deny anything. But he also had something he hadn't had 48 hours ago. A loose end. And if there was one thing Alexander Sterling knew how to do, it was pull a thread until the whole thing unraveled or was rebuilt, depending on which way he pulled. He came out of the bathroom with his black suit jacket folded over his arm, now dry, though hopelessly wrinkled, and found Maria in the kitchen preparing something wrapped in butcher paper. "They're for the cart tonight," she explained before he asked. "I make the muffins early so they can proof properly." She glanced at him. "Did you eat?" "Yes, thank you. Do you have a plan?" "The beginning of one." Maria nodded. She kept working. "I need to charge my phone," Alex said. "Is there a store nearby where I can buy a charger?" "There's a corner store that sells everything." A pause. "You'll also need money for that." Alex opened his mouth to say he had some and stopped in time, because the reality was he had $50 cash left in his wallet from the last time he'd paid for coffee with cash, and a personal credit card, whose available limit was uncertain given the state of his linked accounts. "I have some," he said. "It's fine." Maria wiped her hands and went to the shelf where she kept her purse. She took out a $20 bill and placed it on the counter without looking him in the eye, with the naturalness of someone doing a practical thing who doesn't want to turn it into a moment. "In case it's not enough, Alex, you'll pay me back when you can." She wrapped another muffin. "Or not. It's not the end of the world." Alex took the bill, didn't say thank you again because he had already said thank you too many times in 12 hours, and the word was starting to feel insufficient for what he was receiving. "I'm going to need to ask you another favor," he said. "Go on. The notes you kept from when you worked at the company, I need to see them. Not now. Not if you're not ready. But soon." Maria didn't respond immediately. She continued working with her hands over the dough with that concentration she put into physical things as if they were meditation. "Tonight," she finally said, "when I get back from the cart, if you still want to, I'll be here." She then looked at him directly with those large eyes that had no filter of social courtesy. "Are you going out today to do what?" Alex thought for a second. "To start," he said. What Alex didn't tell Maria that midday was that to start had a very concrete and very unglamorous form that he wouldn't have been able to explain without it sounding exactly what it was. The decision of a man who has lost everything to do the only thing he knows how to do, which is to work with what he has available at the moment, wherever he is. And what he had available was Maria's cart. The idea didn't come all at once. It came in fragments as he walked to the corner store with his own $50 and Maria's $20 in his pocket, looking at the neighborhood with the new attention of someone who had always flown over it in his Suburban and was now treading it for the first time. There was life here he had never seen up close. The woman selling juices on the sidewalk with her industrial blender, the newsstand man who knew every customer's name, the laundromat with sheets hanging on the rooftop clothesline, waving like flags of something ordinary and true. He bought the charger, charged his phone sitting on a bench in front of the store for 40 minutes, making 3 key calls while the battery climbed from 0 to Charles Mendeville to coordinate the next legal steps, to a trusted former employee to ask for an information favor, and to his personal bank to understand exactly what he had and what he didn't. What he had was little, what he didn't have was almost everything. But little and nothing are distinct categories, and Alexander Sterling knew it better than anyone. He returned to the apartment at 4 p.m., Maria was preparing the cart for the night's outing. She checked the burner flame, counted the wrapped muffins, filled the cider container, adjusted the yellow lights that always detached from their clips. Alex watched her work for a moment. "Can I help you?" he asked. Maria looked up. "With what?" "With anything. With the cart. Tonight." She studied him with that direct gaze of hers. "Have you ever sold food on the street?" "No." "Have you pushed one of these carts through 4 neighborhoods at midnight?" "No." "Do you know how much a muffin costs and how much the cider? And how to give change to someone with a $100 bill at 1 a.m.? "No, but I can learn, Maria." She considered it. Something passed across her expression that wasn't exactly a smile but resembled one. "All right," she said, "but you obey what I say on the cart. I'm the boss. Understood? And if anyone recognizes you and makes a fuss, you stay quiet and I'll talk. Understood? And don't complain about the ramps. There are 3 on the route that are really bad, and the cart is heavy." "Understood." Maria handed him a navy blue apron. The spare one she kept folded in the cart bag for when hers got too wet. "Put it on," she said. "You look like what you are with that suit jacket." They left at 10 p.m. Alex pushed the cart, which was indeed heavy, and the broken ramps were exactly as bad as Maria had warned, and Maria walked beside him, setting the pace and the route with the quiet authority of someone who knows her territory. The first 2 hours were relatively anonymous. Maria's late-night customers were night shift workers, security guards, taxi drivers on break, young couples returning late from somewhere. No one looked at Alex with particular attention. No one recognized him. He was just the man in the blue apron serving cider while the lady collected money. It was in the 3rd hour that it happened. A man with a phone in hand, waiting for his muffin, looked at him twice, then a 3rd time. Then he took out his phone, looked up something on the screen, looked at him again, and took a photo. The next day, that photo was on 3 corporate gossip sites and several WhatsApp groups with the same caption, varying in wording but identical in intent. Alexander Sterling, former CEO of Sterling Holdings, selling tacos on the street after his company's collapse. The comments were exactly what you'd imagine those kinds of posts to be. A mix of schadenfreude, cheap moralizing, people who had never heard of Alexander Sterling until that moment, but had a very strong opinion about his character and deservingness. Alex knew it at 7 a.m. the next day, when Charles Mendeville sent him the links with a message that read, "Do you want me to issue a denial?" Alex replied, "No, let them say what they want," because something had happened that night on the cart route that no WhatsApp photo could capture. Somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd neighborhoods, pushing that cart through streets he had never walked, serving cider to people he had never seen, listening to Maria exchange names and short jokes with her regular customers, Mrs. Consuelo from the Pink Building who always asked for a spicy muffin, the gas station attendant who drank cider to get through his shift, the elderly couple who came out for a walk every night and always ended up at the cart. Alex had felt something he didn't expect to feel, that the ground was beneath his feet, not the metaphorical ground of success or financial security, but the literal, real ground, the wet pavement of the streets of a middle-class neighborhood in New York City beneath his shoes, which were already showing the wear and tear of difficult days. A concrete, real ground, without intermediaries, and on that ground he could stand. The rest he would build. The videos arrived on the 3rd day, not the gossip site videos. He had already seen those. Other videos, recordings that some people on the night route had made with the opposite intention, not to ridicule, but to show something that had seemed to them, for some reason that none of them could have articulated precisely, worthy of being seen. In one of them, recorded by Mrs. Consuelo from her apartment window, Alex was seen pushing the cart uphill on a broken ramp, teeth clenched, shoulders tense, while Maria walked ahead, setting the pace, without turning, because she knew he could do it alone, because she had already seen him do it the night before. The video had no text, only the sound of the street at night and the squeaky wheels of the cart. And at the end, when they reached the flat ground and Alex let out a long exhale of effort, Maria's soft laugh saying, "See, the ramps already know you." That video had 400,000 views in 48 hours. The comments were different from those on the gossip site. They said things like, "This is dignity and more respect than half those who've never fallen." And "Who is the lady with the cart? She is the story." Maria saw the comments about her on Alex's phone. She didn't have social media. She never had. It was a practical decision of someone who didn't have time to waste on screens, and she said nothing for a moment. Then, she handed the phone back. "People have too much free time," she said, and went to check the burner. Alex put the phone away, but something in those 400,000 numbers had moved him in a way he didn't expect. Not ego, not vanity, which one might assume in a man accustomed to corporate spotlights. It was something else. It was the confirmation that the ground was still firm, and that on that ground there were real people watching. And what those people were watching was not the fall, but the way of standing up afterward. That was what needed to be built next. And to build it, he needed Maria's evidence, what no one knew about Maria. The folder was navy blue, made of sturdy cardboard, with the kind of metal clasp no one uses anymore, because everything is saved in clouds and servers and external memory, but which Maria had chosen precisely for that reason. Because what is on paper exists in a way that digital doesn't. Digital can be deleted, hacked, lost in an update. Paper, if you keep it well, simply times is. She pulled it from under the bed, from the deepest part, behind a shoebox, and Lily's school portfolio from the previous year. It had a thin layer of dust on the top edge that Maria wiped with a cloth before placing it on the dining table, and that gesture cleaning it before handing it over, as if the folder deserved to be presented with care, said something about her that no words could have said better. It was almost 1 a.m. Lily was asleep. The apartment was silent, except for the distant sound of a truck on the avenue and the occasional drip from the kitchen faucet that Maria had been meaning to fix for 2 weeks, because the plumber charged what she didn't have. Alex sat across from the folder. Maria sat on the other side of the table, her hands crossed on the sunflower oilcloth, like someone about to make a declaration, who has waited for the right moment longer than anyone should have to wait. "Before you open it," Maria said, "I need to tell you something I didn't tell you before." Alex looked up. "When I went to report the irregularities to the head of administration," she began, in the calm voice of someone who has rehearsed a story in her head so many times that it no longer trembles when she tells it, "I didn't go unprepared. I went with copies. I had photocopied the documents I found over 3 weeks. Not all of them, because I didn't always have the opportunity, but the most important ones, the ones with numbers that didn't add up, the ones with signatures that didn't match the authorization system I had learned to read from the notices on conference room walls." Pause. Marcus Blackwood listened to me, told me he appreciated my initiative, and the next day I received the non-renewal notice. You already know that. Yes, what I didn't tell you is that same night, before anything was officially communicated to me, I already knew something was going to happen. I saw it on Marcus's face when I left his office. There's an expression people get when they decide you're a problem that needs to be solved. His eyes were very direct. My father had that expression once when he was told at the construction site that they were going to review his employment situation. 2 days later, he was out of a job. You learn to recognize it. What did you do that night? Before leaving the building, I made more copies of everything in the 4th floor filing cabinets, which were unlocked, because no one thought the cleaning lady could have any interest in what was inside. A very brief pause, and I took them in my grocery bag, under the oranges. Alex looked at her for a second, without saying anything. "Under the oranges," he repeated. "Nobody checks the cleaning lady's grocery bag," Maria said without vanity, just as a statement of fact. "I learned that from my mum too. Invisibility, when you can't change it, becomes a tool." Alex opened the folder. What was inside was more than he expected. It wasn't just a notebook of notes, though that was there, 80 pages written in tight, neat handwriting, date and description of every anomaly Maria had observed for 3 months. There were documents, photocopies of invoices, some with letterheads of suppliers. Alex immediately recognized as companies Sterling Holdings had worked with, and which, seeing them now with the trained eye of someone who knew exactly what to look for, revealed inconsistencies that at the time no one had wanted to see. There were transfer records with receipt stamps. There were 2 printed emails printed on paper dated 10 years and 3 months ago, which were internal communications between Marcus Blackwood and an email address Alex didn't recognize, but which Charles Mendeville would recognize, because it was the type of phantom company address corporate recovery lawyers know by structure. Alex turned the pages slowly. 1 a.m. turned into 2 a.m. Maria made him tea without asking, because it was her tea time and because the moment called for it, and she sat, reading softly what he pointed out, explaining the context of each document with the specific memory of someone who not only copied papers but understood them. "This supplier," Maria said, pointing to an invoice, "appears in 4 different contracts in the 5th quarter. Same amount, supposedly different services rendered, but the claimed services are incompatible with each other. You can't do soil consulting, and at the same time, heavy machinery leasing, and also environmental studies with the same tax ID and the same number of employees. It's operationally impossible." "How do you know that?" Maria shrugged slightly. "Because when you clean the offices of a construction company for 8 months, You learn how the construction company works. The documents people leave on desks and in printers are like a manual. No one gives anyone, but it's there for whoever reads it. A pause. I read a lot. Alex looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't immediately classify. It wasn't condescension. It was something closer to the genuine recognition of someone who had just realized he had been underestimating the intelligence of the person in front of him. Not out of malice, but out of the blind inertia of prejudices one carries without knowing. One carries them. You studied accounting, he said. 3 semesters. Why did you drop out? Because my mom got sick and someone had to work. Did you finish later? Then came Lily and the cart and everything else. No bitterness, just facts. But I learned those 3 semesters well. Alex closed the folder for a moment and looked directly at her. Maria, what you have here, he gestured to the folder with an open hand, is more than my lawyer has been able to gather in 3 days of active investigation with resources. This is the start of a case. Does it still matter after 10 years? Corporate fraud offenses have long statutes of limitations in the US. And if the scheme continued, which it did, because what you saw 10 years ago was the beginning of something that continued operating until last week, then the clock runs from the last fraudulent operation, not the first. Alex opened the folder again. This is the origin. The origin proves systematic intent, and that changes the whole weight of the case. Maria nodded slowly. And Marcus is already in another country, in the Cayman Islands, according to my lawyer. But he left with documentation under his middle name. There are extradition treaties. It's not impossible. And Victoria? Alex took a second longer to respond to that name. Victoria is still in the US. She probably thought the paper trail was small enough that there wouldn't be a case. He looked at the documents. She was wrong. The silence that followed wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of 2 people sitting before something that matters, that weighs, that will have consequences, which still had no shape, but which could already be felt in the air of the small apartment with a damp stain in the corner and children's drawings on the walls. Is there anything else? Maria said. Alex looked up. She hesitated. It was the first time all week that Alex had seen her hesitate, and that alone was enough to tell him what was coming was different from everything before. That night, Maria said, when I copied the documents and took them out under the oranges, I didn't leave the building alone. There was a security guard on the ground floor who always opened the gate for me. A senior man, Mr. Henderson, who had been in the building for 15 years and whom everyone ignored because he was part of the furniture, like me. Pause. Mr. Henderson saw me leave that afternoon with the bag and saw my face. And without me telling him anything, without me explaining anything at all, he told me, "Good luck, Miss Maria, and keep what you're carrying safe." Alex looked at her. He knew. He saw everything, like all of us who are invisible in a building. The thing is, nobody asks us because nobody thinks it's worth asking. A pause. Mr. Henderson died 6 years ago, heart attack, but before he died, he left me an envelope through his daughter. Inside was a USB drive with files he had been copying over the years from the security desk computer, where all building accesses, all visitors, all entry and exit times for each person were recorded. Alex felt something that was physically perceptible, a kind of slow electricity running down his shoulders. You have that memory stick? It's in the folder in the inside pocket, taped with packing tape. Alex opened the inside pocket of the folder. There it was, a small gray USB drive, like those from 15 years ago, with a handwritten paper label in an older man's script that simply said, "In case it helps someday." He held it in the palm of his hand. Mr. Henderson, a security guard no one saw, who for years had silently recorded everything that happened in that building, who had recognized in a young woman with a bag of oranges someone doing the right thing, and who had decided, without anyone asking him, to do his part. "Do you know what's on this drive?" Alex asked. "I opened it once years ago when I got it. I saw access records, names, dates, times. I didn't fully understand what it meant without the context. But I saw Marcus Blackwood's name at times that didn't correspond to his official working hours. And I saw Victoria Thorne's name, before she was Sterling, when she still used her maiden name, in 2 visitor logs dating back 12 years. The weight of that fell on the table between them, with the silent gravity of something that takes a while to fall. But when it falls completely. Victoria and Marcus, 12 years ago, before she married Alex. Before Alex probably even knew her, which meant that when Victoria entered Alexander Sterling's life, Marcus Blackwood was already in Victoria's life, which meant that the marriage, the 14 years, the dinners with senators, the paintings on the penthouse walls, the Chanel No. 5 perfume, had been part of the plan from the beginning. Alex placed the memory stick carefully on the table. Maria watched him. "Are you okay?" she asked in the quiet voice of someone asking a real question, not a rhetorical one. "No," he said, "but I will be." And it was the first time since Victoria closed the door that Alexander Sterling said it and believed it at the same time. The evidence. Charles Mendeville arrived at apartment 3B at 11 a.m. the next day with a black leather briefcase, 3 days of dark circles under his eyes, and the coffee he'd bought at the corner store still in his hand because he hadn't had time to drink it. He was a slender man of 51 with thin-rimmed glasses and that kind of composure only lawyers have, who have seen many difficult things and have learned that serenity is part of the job. Alex was waiting at the door, and the two briefly embraced with the restraint of men who have known each other for 30 years and know exactly how long the moment of humanity lasts before it's time to get to work. Maria greeted them, put real coffee on the table, not the corner stores, which Charles visibly relievedly left unfinished, and sat in the corner chair without anyone telling her to, because it was her table and her home, and because what was about to be discussed included her in a way no one present pretended it didn't. Charles opened the navy blue folder. The silence that followed as he reviewed it had the particular density of lawyers' silence when they read, a concentration that excludes everything else, which is not discourtesy, but absolute focus. He turned pages, held invoices up to the light, read the printed emails twice each. He took the USB drive and connected it to his laptop with the care of someone handling evidence, because that was technically what it was. And he reviewed the files with the same methodical attention. No one spoke for 22 minutes. When Charles looked up, his expression was that of someone who had found something he didn't expect to find, and who was internally recalibrating the magnitude of the problem and the solution. "Where did you get this?" he asked Alex. "I didn't get it," Alex said. "Maria had it." Charles looked at Maria for the first time with the same real attention he had given the folder. He studied her the way lawyers study witnesses, looking for consistency, credibility, the solidity of what they are seeing. "You worked at Sterling Holdings, cleaning, morning shift, 5th to 10th floor, for 8 months, 10 years and some months ago, and you copied these documents during that time?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because they didn't add up, and because someone had to notice." Charles looked at her for another second, then nodded with the slowness of someone who has just made an important decision. "You'll need to testify," he said. "At some point in the process, everything you saw and how you saw it will have to be said in front of a judge." "I know," Maria said, without a muscle moving on her face. "Are you willing? Why do you think I kept it for 10 years? Charles Mendeville, who in 30 years of his career had seen key witnesses fold under far less pressure than this case would generate, looked at her for another moment and then returned to the documents. "All right," he said, "let's begin." They worked 8 hours straight, Charles on the laptop, building a map of the fraudulent structure from Maria's documents and cross-referencing them with what his team had gathered in previous days. Alex at his side, contributing internal company knowledge, names, processes, contract dates he himself had signed, without knowing they were part of the scaffolding. And Maria, who no one would have expected to be the most useful person in the room, answering questions with surgical precision about details neither Charles nor Alex could know, because they were details of what happens in a corporate building when no one who matters is looking. "This supplier on the third quarter invoice," Charles said at one point, pointing to the screen, "do you know if they had a physical presence in the building? Did you ever see anyone represent them?" Maria thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Once, a man with a gray briefcase who arrived on a Tuesday in October without an appointment and went straight to the 10th floor without passing reception. Mr. Henderson registered him because that was his protocol, even if the people upstairs told him it wasn't necessary." Pause. "The name he gave on the register was Thorne, which is also my last name, which is why I remembered it. Different from mine, but same last name." Charles typed, opened the USB drive, searched access records by date and last name, found it in 40 seconds. Thorne, Edward. Tuesday, October 14th, 10 years and 4 months ago. Direct access 10th floor. Authorized by M. Blackwood. Charles looked up. Edward Thorne is the name of the legal representative for 3 of the phantom companies Marcus used to move money. He's Victoria's brother. The silence was brief, but absolute. "Everything connects," Alex said softly. "Everything connects," Charles confirmed. "And most importantly, it connects backward. What Maria saw 10 years ago isn't an isolated incident. It's the documented origin of a scheme that continued operating for a decade. That means the fraud didn't expire because it never stopped." He closed the laptop halfway and looked at Alex. "This is recoverable, Alex. Not everything, Not immediately, and it won't be easy, but there's a case. A real case. Alex said nothing, rested his elbows on the table, and looked at the navy blue folder with an expression Maria, from her corner chair, identified without difficulty. It was the expression of someone who had been falling for days and had just felt something firm beneath his feet. "What do we need now?" Alex asked. "Three things." Charles raised a finger. "First, a corporate criminal defense attorney. I'm civil and commercial. This has exceeded my area. I know someone. Miss Attorney Davies, no relation to the Thorns in the registry." He clarified with a small, dry irony, "Who is the best at this and owes me a favor. I'll call her today." Second finger. "We need Maria's documents to be authenticated by an expert, so their value as evidence is unassailable before a judge. I'll coordinate that." Third finger. "And we need protection for Maria." The atmosphere in the apartment changed with that last word. "Protection?" Maria asked, without alarm, but with attention. "When Marcus and Victoria realize a case is building, and they will realize because they have lawyers monitoring these movements, they'll want to know where the evidence is coming from, and at some point, they'll come to you." Charles looked directly at her. "I'm not telling you this to scare you. I'm telling you so we're prepared before it happens." Maria processed that with the same calm with which she processed everything, and Lily asked too. "That's why I need to know if there's somewhere you and Lily can stay while the process moves forward. Something discreet." Maria looked at Alex. Alex looked at her. "There are options," he said. "We'll figure it out." Charles made the call to Miss Attorney Davies from the apartment on speakerphone so Alex could hear. She was a woman with a deep, direct voice who listened to the case summary for 6 minutes without interrupting, and at the end said, "Send me the scanned documents this afternoon. We have a meeting tomorrow at 9, and tell your client not to talk to any media until I say so." "None. Understood?" "Yes," Charles said. "There's a direct eyewitness with access to the operation in the initial period." Charles looked at Maria. "Yes," he said, "and she's solid." A brief pause on the other end of the line. "Even better," Miss Attorney said, and hung up. It was that afternoon, while Charles scanned documents, and Maria prepared the cart for the night, because the cart didn't stop, life didn't stop. There were muffins to bake and cider to warm, and 4 neighborhoods to cover, and that didn't change because everyone else's world was in turmoil. When Alex peeked into the kitchen and found her working with that efficiency of hers that never diminished, Maria said, "Listen, there's something I want to ask you, and I don't quite know how to ask it." She put the knife down on the board and turned to look at him. Because when someone says they don't know how to ask something, the right thing to do is look at their face while they try. "Why did you keep all this for 10 years? Alex asked. "Not for the case. Not strategically. Why did you, who had your own world to sustain, keep carrying this?" Maria took a moment to answer, not because she didn't know the answer, she knew it perfectly for a long time, but because it was an answer she had never said aloud, and by saying it, it would become real in a different way. "Because I saw how the world works when people who have power decide the rules don't apply to them," she said with a calm, unedged voice. "I saw it in what happened to my dad on the construction site. I saw it when they silenced me. I saw it in every person I know who has worked their whole life. And one day someone with more money or more connections comes along and tells them that what they built is worth nothing and to leave." A pause. "And I thought that if someday I had something in my hand that could change even a piece of that, I didn't have the right to throw it away." Alex looked at her for a long moment. "Did you think you would use it someday?" "Honestly," Maria said, "not always. There were years when I thought it was just paper stored under the bed and that's where it would stay, but I kept saving it anyway." She returned to the knife and board. "Things you keep on principle, even if you don't know what for, almost always end up serving a purpose." Alex remained in the doorway of the kitchen, looking at the drawings on the living room walls, the sunflower tablecloth, the shelf with the framed picture, and Lily's notebooks, and the second-hand novels, and the little lights from the cart Maria had plugged in to recharge. He thought of the white marble penthouse, of the paintings by artists he had bought in galleries, because his image consultant said, a man of his position should have them, of dinners with senators, where everything was discussed except what mattered, of 14 years of a life that had been, deep down, a very expensive backdrop, with nothing real behind it. And he thought of this apartment with a damp stain in the corner and a dripping faucet and a creaky burgundy sofa and drawings made by an 8-year-old girl who braided her own hair and ate breakfast and did multiplications at the same time, and who had told him with the honesty, without cruelty, that only children have, that he looked like something very bad had happened. Maria said, "When this is over, when the process moves forward and there's a result, I want to talk to you about something." "About what?" "About what comes next for both of us." A pause. But that's for when it's over. Now, we have to finish. Maria looked at him for a moment, then nodded once and returned to her muffins. And in the living room, Charles Mendeville finished scanning the last document from the navy blue folder, while outside, the city remained the noisy, contradictory city, full of people who didn't know what was happening in a third-floor apartment on an unimportant street, and the battle that had been waiting in a drawer under a bed behind a shoebox for 10 years finally began. The storm. The first warning came without the form of a warning. It was a Tuesday at 6 a.m., 3 days after the meeting with Charles and Miss Attorney Davies, when Maria went downstairs to retrieve the cart chained on the ground floor and found that the yellow string lights had been ripped off, not one, but all of them. The padlock chain was still intact, the cart in place, but someone had run their fingers along each of the wooden clothespin hooks and removed every little light with the patience of someone who wants to leave a message without leaving traces. Maria stood in front of the cart for a moment. She counted what was missing, 17 lights. Then she went up to the apartment, told Alex what she had found, and started preparing Lily's breakfast as if nothing had happened, because Lily was in the bedroom, finishing getting dressed, and Maria had learned long ago that the fears one shows in front of their children are the fears the children carry for the rest of their lives. "It's a warning," Alex said softly. "I know," Maria replied, just as softly, without leaving the griddle. "They know we're moving something, or they suspect. There's a difference." She flipped the omelette with her fingers, quickly, without burning herself, with years of practiced muscle. If they knew for sure, it wouldn't be little lights. It would be something else. Alex looked at her. She was right. It was a probe, not an action. Someone sending a signal to see how they would respond. "I'm going to call Charles," he said. "Wait until Lily leaves for school." Lily left at 8:10 with her green dinosaur backpack, her asymmetrical braids, and her math notebook under her arm. And before going down the stairs, she stopped at the door and looked at Alex with that unfiltered gaze of hers. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No," Alex said. Lily looked at him for a second, longer than necessary for a satisfactory answer, and then looked at her mom. "Is something wrong?" she repeated, this time to Maria. "Nothing that won't be resolved," Maria said. "Go on. You'll be late." Lily went down the stairs. Maria waited for the sound of the ground floor gate before releasing the breath she had been holding. Charles Mendeville arrived that same day with Miss Attorney Davies, who in person was exactly like her voice. Direct, unadorned, with a briefcase under her arm, and an expression that implied she had seen more complicated things than ripped-off lights, and that this was not the time to waste on unnecessary alarms. The lights incident could be a coincidence, or it could be pressure, she said. Sitting in the corner chair Maria had already adopted as her own, which meant Maria had sat in the other chair, which in turn meant apartment 3B had become, without anyone formally declaring it, the headquarters of something that still had no name but had direction. In any case, we're changing the timeline. I'm filing the criminal complaint this week, sooner than planned, because once the process is formally open, the level of legal protection significantly increases. She looked at Maria. "The documents are authenticated. The expert finishes tomorrow," Charles said. "Good. As soon as you have the report, send it to me, and I need you." She looked at Alex. "To be available to testify on Thursday afternoon. We're going to build the complaint in 2 layers. First, the corporate fraud, which is the most documented, and on top of that, the collusion." "And Marcus?" Alex asked. "He's in the Caymans. Marcus is Interpol's problem, and the State Department's, and I've already made the right call." A brief pause. "I have a contact at FinCEN who's been tracking capital movements to that destination for 2 years. Marcus's case is not isolated. He's on a bigger radar than ours, which for us is an advantage because it means state resources are already invested in this and will join the case the moment we formalize it." The apartment was silent, except for the dripping faucet that remained unfixed. "How long will the process take?" Maria asked. Miss Attorney looked at her with clear respect. The kind of respect that doesn't need to be stated but is seen in the quality of attention. "Corporate criminal cases in the US average between 1 and 3 years before sentencing," she said without softening. "There are ways to speed it up. There are ways it gets stalled. I won't promise you what I can't guarantee. What I can tell you is that the evidence you kept makes this case unusually strong for what is normally seen in this area." Maria nodded. "Do I need to do anything different these days with Lily, with the cart, with my routine?" "For now, everything stays the same. Normalcy is your best protection because it shows there's nothing to hide." Miss Attorney picked up her folder. "But if anything else happens, anything at all, however small it may seem, call me immediately. Don't evaluate whether it's important or not. Call me, and I will evaluate. The second warning came 4 days later, and this one was not small. Maria left at 10 p.m. with the cart towards the first neighborhood of her route. Alex went with her as he had every night since the first. Blue apron, squeaky wheels, broken ramps. It was a rainless night with the city sky doing that low orange color that nights have when clouds retain the light from buildings, and the route proceeded with the normality of things that repeat until they become rituals. It was on the way back, around 1:40 a.m., when they turned the corner toward the building and saw the spare cart, the older one, the one Maria kept in the building's inner courtyard, in case the main one needed repair. It was overturned, the trays crushed, the burner bent with something heavy, the steel structure twisted in a way that doesn't happen by accident, but by deliberate and sustained force. And on the remains, written in black marker on the cement floor of the courtyard, was a phrase, "Those who don't know how to keep quiet learn to." Alex read the phrase and felt something that wasn't fear. He had already processed fear in the first few days, when he understood the magnitude of what Marcus and Victoria had been capable of doing. Instead, it was something colder and more concrete. Confirmation that the other side had moved from probing to direct pressure, and that this meant something of what was moving legally had reached their ears, which also meant that the case was real enough for them to be afraid. That, paradoxically, was good news. But what mattered at that moment wasn't strategic analysis. What mattered was Lily. Alex looked at Maria. She already had her phone in hand. "Lily's with my neighbor on 2A, she said, answering the question before he asked it. "I asked her to stay there tonight because I had a feeling." A pause. "I'm going to get her now." "Maria, I'm fine," she said. And she meant it in the way people who have learned to separate what they feel from what they need to do say it. She was fine in the sense of functional, operational, capable of taking the next step, even if her heart was pounding hard inside. "Call Miss Attorney. I'm going for Lily." Alex called Miss Attorney Davies while Maria went up to the second floor. The lawyer answered on the third ring, with a voice that was not of someone who had just woken up, but of someone who had been waiting for that call. What happened? Alex described what they had found. Miss Attorney listened without interrupting. "Photos of everything," she said when he finished. "Every angle, including the phrase 'on the floor.' Don't touch anything. I'm calling a contact at the district attorney's office right now to file a report tonight." Pause. "Is the girl okay?" "Yes, she was with a neighbor." "Good. Tomorrow at 9 a.m. at my office, all three of you. And Alex, this is good, even if it doesn't look like it." "I know," he said. "They know because they're scared, and they're scared because the case is reaching them." Lily saw the destroyed cart because Maria couldn't avoid it. The inner courtyard was the mandatory path to reach the stairs, and the girl passed the remains before Maria could intervene. She stopped, looked at it, looked at the phrase on the floor. Then she looked at her mom with those direct eyes she had, and which at that moment were not the eyes of a scared child, but the eyes of a child processing information, with the seriousness of someone who has grown up in a world where difficult things are not hidden, but explained. "They did it because we have the things in the folder?" she asked. Maria looked at her. "How do you know about the folder?" "Because I saw it when you took it out from under the bed. And because I listened a little, without apparent guilt. Not everything, but enough to understand that there are bad people who don't want Daddy." She stopped, corrected herself. "Who don't want Mr. Alex to get his stuff back." Alex was behind Maria and heard that. The daddy corrected midway. He heard it and said nothing because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be too much for that moment. "Yes," Maria said with direct honesty. "That's why. And they're going to get it back anyway. We're going to try." Lily looked at the destroyed cart once more. Then she looked at Alex. "Are you scared?" she asked him. "A little," he said with the same honesty. "My mom says fear is a sign that something matters." She took Maria's hand. "Then it matters a lot." And she went up the stairs with her dinosaur backpack, leaving the two adults in the courtyard in front of the remains of the old cart, under the orange city sky at night, saying nothing because she had already said what was necessary. The week that followed was the most difficult since the beginning of everything. The corporate gossip sites fed, Charles later learned, by a public relations firm expressly hired for that purpose, began publishing stories about Alex that mixed real facts with insinuations designed to smear that Sterling Holdings' collapse wasn't an external fraud, but internal mismanagement, that Alex had known about the irregularities for years and had ignored them for convenience, that government contracts had inflated prices he had personally approved. Victoria gave an interview to an anonymous society magazine, attributed to sources close to the family, in which she described a marriage where she had silently suffered her husband's irresponsible decisions for years. The interview was accompanied by photos of Victoria on an ocean view terrace, impeccable, serene, with the kind of smile that requires knowing one will come out of the photograph looking good. Alex saw it on his phone, on the cart, between the second and third neighborhoods of the night route. He closed it without comment. "Did you see it?" Maria asked, who always saw when he looked at the screen with that expression. "Yes," and Alex thought for a moment, what exactly would someone who knows they're going to lose on the legal field do to win elsewhere? He put his phone away. "Miss, attorney told me this would happen, that before the case went to court, they would try to destroy me in public so the judge would enter the process already with a formed opinion, and sometimes it works with certain judges in certain contexts." A pause. "But Miss, Attorney Davies chose the court carefully, and the documents in your folder aren't contaminated by any magazine interview." Maria pushed the cart uphill on the worst ramp of the route, the one in the market alley, without asking for help, even though Alex was beside her and could have. "You know what bothers me most," she said without missing a beat. "Not the interview, or the broken cart, or the lights. What bothers me most is that they've been doing this for years, using the system, using money, using connections. And during those years, there were people like my dad, like Mr. Henderson, like me, who paid the price for what they took, nameless, unnoticed, without anyone writing an interview about us." Alex listened. "That's why it matters that this goes all the way," he said. "Yes," Maria said. They reached the flat ground. The cart's wheels stopped squeaking with effort and returned to their normal sound. That sound Alex knew so well he would recognize it anywhere. Maria said, "Listen, when this is over, you already said it once. I'll keep saying it until it happens." She didn't respond. But in the darkness of the street, under the orange city sky that never fully darkens, Alex thought he saw in Maria's profile, pushing her cart toward the next neighborhood, something that resembled a small hidden smile, and that was enough to keep walking. The trial. The District Criminal Court, 17th Judicial District, was a gray four-story building in downtown Manhattan that smelled of machine coffee and printed paper, and that kind of suspended time found in places where important things happen unhurriedly and without spectacle. The courtroom on the second floor had high windows with leaded panes that filtered light in oblique rays onto the dark wooden chairs and a raised dais, where Judge Thompson, 62 years old, 28 years on the bench, with a face that had seen everything and was not easily impressed, presided with the economy of gestures of someone who knows his presence is already sufficient declaration of authority. Alex arrived with Attorney Davies and Charles Mendivil at 8:45 a.m. The hearing was at 9. The courtroom already had people. Victoria's legal team, 4 lawyers, expensive suits, perfectly organized folders, and journalists in the public rows, 2 with notebooks, the rest with phones ready to record what the law allowed to be recorded. Victoria arrived at 9:02 a.m. Alex hadn't seen her since the night she slammed the penthouse door. She entered the courtroom with the same confident stride as always, her hair in a perfectly executed chignon, an impeccably tailored navy suit, and that structured, calm expression of hers that for 14 years Alex had interpreted as serenity, and that now, with the eye of someone who knows what they're looking at, he correctly identified for what it was, the deliberate control of someone who needs no one to see what lies beneath. Their gazes met for a second. Victoria didn't blink, neither did Alex. Then both looked forward, toward the dais, where Judge Thompson began to arrange his papers with precise, unhurried movements. The first 3 hours of the hearing were technical and dense, presentation of evidence, objections from the defense, replies from Miss Attorney Davies, interventions from the judge, with questions that seemed neutral, but which Alex learned to read over the course of the morning as the way that 62-year-old man was publicly constructing his understanding of the case. Victoria's team was good. Alex admitted it to himself without difficulty, because not acknowledging it would have been underestimating the problem. They questioned the chain of custody of Maria's documents. They questioned the legal validity of a USB drive delivered by a deceased security guard through his daughter. They questioned the accounting interpretation of the invoices, arguing that without the full context of the corporate books, which had disappeared along with Marcus, the partial documents could be interpreted in multiple ways. These were solid arguments. They were exactly the arguments Miss Attorney Davies had anticipated during weeks of preparation, and she had a response for each. The chain of custody was impeccable because the certified expert had worked on the originals under controlled conditions, and the report was unassailable. The USB drive had been authenticated by a forensic IT expert who confirmed that the files had not been modified since their original creation, and the accounting interpretation of the invoices did not require complete books to be valid, because what Maria's documents established was not an accounting conclusion, but a pattern of behavior, repetition of suppliers, identical amounts in irregular periods, and beneficiaries that the Secretary of State linked directly to Marcus Blackwood and his brother-in-law, that any judge with experience in corporate fraud could read without needing accounting degrees. The moment Alex had been waiting for, without knowing exactly he was waiting for it, arrived at 12:40 p.m. Victoria's lead attorney, a man in his 50s with a radio voice and the confidence of someone who had won many difficult cases, asked to speak and said with perfect modulation, "With all due respect to this court, the case presented today fundamentally rests on the testimony and documents of a person without professional accounting training, without hierarchy in the company, whose operation she allegedly irregularized, and without any verifiable incentive to keep information for 10 years, except," and here he paused meaningfully, "the one that might derive from a personal relationship with the plaintiff, whose exact nature this court should carefully consider." The insinuation hung in the air. Alex felt something stir in his chest. Not rage, not yet, not yet. Miss Attorney Davies waited exactly long enough for the insinuation to fully expose itself to the judge, and then stood up with the calm of someone who has been waiting 3 decades for this kind of move. "With the court's permission," she said. The witness Maria Rodriguez's background includes accounting studies which, although not completed due to circumstances beyond her control, circumstances that include precisely having been illegally fired from the plaintiff's company when she reported the irregularities, now before this court are sufficient to support her recognition of the documented patterns. However, and here Miss Attorney raised a finger with a delicacy that was pure sharpness, the court does not need to evaluate Miss Rodriguez's education to validate the evidence she preserved, because that evidence has been certified by expert witnesses whose competence is not in question. Miss Rodriguez is not the case. The case is the documents. And documents have no academic training or personal relationships. Documents simply times are. Silence in the courtroom. Judge Thompson wrote something in his notebook. Victoria's lawyer tried to respond. The judge stopped him with a slight wave of his hand. "The objection is noted and will be considered in the evaluation," the judge said with a neutrality that, to Alex, seemed at that moment the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. Alex's testimony came at 1:20 p.m. He sat in the witness stand facing the courtroom and looked at Victoria for the first time since she had arrived. Victoria looked back at him from her seat with that structured calm of hers that hadn't moved all morning. The defense attorney asked the questions he had to ask. Alex answered everything with the dry precision of someone who had prepared each answer with his attorney for weeks, who knew exactly what to say and exactly what not to say, because saying it outside the correct context would cost him more than it would give him. It was at the end, when Miss Attorney Davies asked him the prosecution's own questions, that the moment no one in that room, except perhaps Miss Attorney, who had planned it, expected occurred. "Mr. Sterling," Miss Attorney said, "can you explain to the court what it means to you that the first person to detect and document the fraudulent scheme that destroyed your company was a cleaning employee whom no one asked, whom no one believed, and whom the person responsible for that scheme fired precisely to silence her?" The defense attorney stood up to object. The judge let him speak, and then said the question was admissible because it went to the context of the harm suffered by third parties within the framework of the case. Alex took a second, looked at the room, the journalists with their notebooks, the lawyers with their folders, the judge with his notebook, and in the back, because Miss Attorney had expressly requested it and the judge had allowed it, sitting in the last row with a green blouse and her hair tied back and her hands crossed over the bag she always carried, Maria Rodriguez. Alex looked at her for a moment. She looked back at him, directly, without blinking, with those large eyes that had no filter or protocol. "It means," Alex said, with a voice that was no longer the voice of the corporate executive, nor of the defeated man on the park bench, but something between the two, and calmer than both, that the system that stole everything from me also tried to steal from her, and that she, without resources, she kept the evidence for 10 years because she believed the truth was more important than the comfort of forgetting. A pause. "I lost a company." She lost her job, her security, years of her life that could have been different if someone had listened to her at the time. What she did required a kind of courage that I, with all my resources, with all my contacts, did not have the capacity to recognize until I was left with nothing, and she was the only thing still standing. The courtroom was silent. Judge Thompson wrote at length in his notebook. Alex did not look at Victoria. It was no longer necessary. The verdict did not come that day. Verdicts in corporate criminal cases do not come the same day as testimony, and Miss Attorney Davies had clearly explained that from the beginning. The process had stages, deadlines, possible appeals. What did come that week, 4 days after the hearing, was a preliminary injunction that Judge Thompson issued before the final verdict. The injunction froze all assets registered in the name of Victoria Thorne Sterling, and the companies linked to her as the ultimate beneficiary, including the Hamptons property. It prohibited her from leaving the country and formally notified the financial authorities of the Cayman Islands under the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty in criminal matters of the request for localization and asset information for Edward Blackwood, Marcus with his middle name, for crimes of fraud, tax evasion, and criminal conspiracy. Charles Mendeville called Alex to inform him of the measure at 6 p.m. with a voice that for the first time in weeks had something other than tension. "It's not the verdict," Charles said, "but it's the judge telling the world that the case has enough weight to take action before it's resolved. A judge doesn't do that with a case that won't succeed. How much longer until the sentence? Months, probably between 6 and 9. A pause. "But Alex, the path is clear. What Maria kept for 10 years under the bed, plus what Mr. Henderson left on that USB drive, plus what my team reconstructed from the financial structure, forms a case that the defense won't be able to dismantle without costing them more than they're willing to spend." Alex was in the kitchen of apartment 3B when he received the call. Maria was preparing the cart for the night, as every night, with the same efficiency as always. Lily was doing homework at the table, her brow furrowed over a fractions problem that wasn't working out. He hung up the phone. He stood for a moment in the kitchen. "Good news?" Maria asked without turning. The judge issued preliminary injunctions. Maria stopped her hands for a second, just a second. Then she continued, "That's good. It's very good." Lily looked up from her fractions. "Did you win?" she asked. "Not yet," Alex said, "but we're doing well. When will you win?" "A few months." Lily processed that with the seriousness of someone for whom a few months is a perfectly manageable amount of time. "Okay," she said, and went back to her fractions. And Maria, her back turned, adjusting the cart's burner with a precise flick of her wrist, smiled in a way no one saw because no one was looking that way, except Alex, who was looking that way, and who filed that smile away somewhere inside with the same care with which Lily had drawn the sad man in the park. The new life. The verdict came on a Thursday in October, 8 months and 12 days after that rainy night in the park, where Alexander Sterling had sat on a wet bench with nowhere to go, and a woman with a coffee and pastry cart had appeared from among the streetlights like something destiny had been patiently preparing for a decade. Miss Attorney Davies called Alex at 2 p.m. with a voice he had never heard from her before, and which he took a moment to identify. It was the voice of someone who has won something that deserved to be won, and who feels the specific weight of that kind of victory, which is not the same as winning something by luck or position, but winning something because the truth was greater than the other side's resources. "Guilty," she said, "on all counts. Corporate fraud, criminal conspiracy, tax evasion. Victoria Thorne, guilty of collusion and improper use of a digital signature. Ordered restitution of recoverable assets of Sterling Holdings, including contracts, real estate assets in the national territory, and linked accounts." A pause. "And Alex, Marcus Blackwood, was arrested in the Cayman Islands this morning. Extradition is in process." Alex was in the room he now occupied in apartment 3B. Maria had given him the bedroom, and she slept on the burgundy sofa. An argument Alex had tried to reverse for months without success, because Maria had the advantage over him that in her house she made the decisions. And he heard the verdict, standing by the blue-checkered window, with the city outside being the same city as always, and inside something that wouldn't quite fit in his chest. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me," Miss Attorney said. "Thank Miss Rodriguez. Without her folder, without Mr. Henderson, without 10 years of keeping what no one asked her to keep, this case would have been very difficult." A brief pause. "It's you, Alex, but she's the story." He told Maria that night when they returned from the cart route. There was no solemn way to say it, nor would Maria have wanted there to be. He told her in the kitchen while she put the leftover cider in the refrigerator, and he took off the navy blue apron he still wore every night, because no one had said it was no longer necessary, and because at some point it had stopped being a gesture of solidarity and had become something that was simply part of the routine. Maria listened to everything, the verdict, the restitution of assets, Marcus's arrest. When he finished, she closed the refrigerator, leaned against the counter with her hands at her sides, and looked at the sunflower tablecloth for a moment. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Strange," Alex said with honesty. "I thought I would feel more, or something different. But it feels like when the rain stops, and you go out and the ground is wet, and the air smells different, and everything is still there, but everything is new." Maria nodded slowly. "That's because what you're recovering isn't the same as what you lost," she said. "What you lost was the old Alex. What you're recovering is for the Alex of now, and they're not the same person." Alex looked at her. He didn't say, "They're not the same person." The apartment was silent. Lily was asleep. The new little lights on the cart, replaced months ago, 17 exactly, one by one, were off and stored in their bag. The kitchen faucet had stopped dripping 3 weeks ago when Alex, tired of waiting for the plumber, had watched a video on his phone and fixed it himself with a wrench and 40 minutes of patience. "Maria," Alex said. "I know what you're going to say," she replied. "Yes, that you want to talk about what comes next. Yes, and if I don't want to talk yet, then I'll wait." She looked at him. Those direct, unfiltered eyes that in 8 months Alex had learned to read with the precision of someone who studies a language until they stop translating and start thinking directly in it. "It's not that I don't want to," Maria said carefully, choosing her words with the honesty she always chose. "It's that there are things I need to understand. First, you're going to get your company back, your money, your name. You're going to be Alexander Sterling again, and I'm going to remain the cart lady in the park. That's not what." Let me finish. It wasn't harshness. It was the voice of someone who has thought about something a lot and needs to say it completely before being interrupted. I'm not saying it as a complaint. I'm saying it because I'm honest, and because honesty is the only thing that makes things last. I am this person, this apartment, this cart, this life. I'm not ashamed of that, but I also don't want anyone to enter my life because it looks pretty from the outside. And then, when the novelty wears off, it turns out that the beauty was the distance, and not the thing itself. The silence that followed was long. Alex thought about it. He really thought about it, not with the haste of someone trying to calm a worry, but with the seriousness it deserves when someone tells you something true. "I've been in this apartment for 8 months, he said. "Finally, I've pushed that cart through 4 neighborhoods in the rain and in the cold, and on nights when my whole body begged to stop. I've eaten scrambled eggs and toast, and I've fixed your kitchen faucet. And I've listened to Lily explain fractions to me with a patience I never had for anyone." A pause. "I'm not looking from the outside. I've been on the inside for 8 months. And if there's one thing I know with more certainty than anything I've known in my life as an executive and a man of money, and a person who thought he knew how the world worked, it's that inside is where I want to be." Maria looked at him for a long moment. "Even when you get everything back?" she asked. "Even then. Especially then, because getting everything back without this makes no sense. And I no longer do things that make no sense." Another silence, shorter this time. "There's something I want to propose to you," Alex said, "and it's not what you're thinking." Maria raised her eyebrows slightly. "When Sterling Holdings is reconstituted," he began, with the voice of a man thinking as he speaks, "building an idea in real time, it will need a financial director, a role I won't be able to fill alone because I don't yet trust my own judgment to choose the right people. I've spent weeks thinking about who I'd want in that position." He looked directly at her. "You detected a corporate fraud scheme with 3 semesters of accounting and 8 months of cleaning floors. With real access to the books, with full training, with the resources a financial director deserves, I don't even want to imagine what you'd be capable of seeing." Maria opened her mouth, then closed it. "I don't have a degree," she said. "Degrees are given by time and money. Judgment is given by something else." Alex didn't look away. "There are universities that have executive evening programs for people who couldn't finish at the right time. I researched it. 2 years. Maria Rodriguez, certified public accountant, financial director of Sterling Holdings." A pause. "If you want." The silence of apartment 3B at that moment had a quality neither of them could have described exactly, but which both felt. It was the silence of something that arrives after a long wait, and when it arrives, it doesn't have the sound one imagined, but something quieter and more real and more lasting. "I'd have to think about it," Maria said. "I know you would. That's why I'm saying it now and not waiting for an answer now." "And Lily?" "Lily has already explained fractions to me twice. I'm doing well in math." Maria let out something that was a laugh, brief, genuine, the kind that comes out without permission. And that was enough for the air in the apartment to change, in the same way the air changes when the rain stops. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday at 7 p.m., Alex installed the last of the new little lights on the cart. This time he fastened them with sturdier clips, not wood, but stainless steel, because he had researched which type best withstood moisture. And Maria watched him from the building's doorway, arms crossed, with that expression of hers of someone who evaluates others' work, without saying whether it's good or bad until it's finished. When he stood up and turned on the string, the 17 yellow lights flickered together and then stabilized, brighter than the previous ones, because the new string had better insulation. "How does it look?" Alex asked. Maria looked at them for a moment. "Good," she said. And in Maria's mouth, good was exactly the same as perfect, but without affectation. Lily appeared at the door beside her mom, with her drawing notebook under her arm. For 2 months now, she had been filling notebooks with a speed that required buying new ones regularly, and she looked at the lit lights with the same serious evaluation she put into everything. "It's better than the others," she declared. "That's what I say," Alex said. "Shall we go out?" Lily asked. "We go out," Maria said, and the three stepped out into the night. Alex pushing the cart with its wheels that I squeaked on the ramps and quieted on the flat ground. Maria setting the pace and the route with the quiet authority of someone who knows her territory, and Lily between the two, with her notebook under her arm and her eyes wide on the city at night, mentally drawing what she would later transfer to paper, with the large, round letters she hadn't yet decided whether to make smaller or leave the same, because that's how she liked them. The yellow lights flickered softly over the steel of the cart. The cider steamed. The muffins waited, wrapped, with the patience of things that have been made well and know someone will want them. And in some neighborhood of the city, on some park bench or late-night doorway, there were people waiting for something warm on a cold night. People who worked when no one was looking, who built things no one saw, who kept what was right to keep, even if no one asked them to. People like Maria, people who, if you were lucky and humble enough to find them, could change your entire life. 2 months later, Alex asked Maria a question beside the restored cart on the same corner where everything had begun, under a rainless sky for the first time in many nights. It wasn't a question that required kneeling, or spectacular rings, or witnesses. It was the direct question of a man who had learned that important things are said as they are, without adornment, because adornments are for people who don't trust the weight of what they have. Maria took exactly the time she needed to answer, which wasn't long, and Lily, who was drawing in her notebook, leaning on the cart, looked up for a moment, evaluated the situation with the unfiltered gaze of her freshly turned 9 years old, and returned to her drawing because she had known it for a long time, ever since the night she had left the drawing of a sad man sitting on a bench in the rain on the burgundy sofa, and had known with the certainty, without explanation, that children have for things adults are still trying to understand, that that sad man wasn't going to be sad forever, that he had come to stay. Yes.